A US government source saying it's absolute chaos, that President Trump is not engaging in any of the detail at all.
Yes, he's not known for detail, is he? There is some semblance of narrative through that chaos. And I think you go back to that White House meeting, that infamous one where, he behaved disgracefully and humiliated Zelensky. I think we are back there.
The US and Ukraine, as I say, reported to have drafted a new 19-point deal, left most of the politically sensitive elements to be decided by the leaders of the US and Ukraine. That's according to Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister. Serhiy Kyslytsya was at the talks in Geneva, which have now ended. And speaking this morning, Keir Starmer said a just and lasting peace is the focus of the discussions.
There's more work to do. As you know, along with President Macron, I've been leading the Coalition of the Willing, which is a group of countries that have put in place support for Ukraine, particularly capability. And I'm now planning that we will meet virtually tomorrow. So we will host a Coalition of the Willing call to further discuss the progress that is being made, and I hope can be made, towards the thing that matters above all else, which is a just and lasting peace, which matters for Ukraine, but it also matters for all of us, because the conflict in Ukraine has had a direct impact here in the United Kingdom. So progress, yes, more work to do, but we've all got our sleeves rolled up, ready to put in those hard yards, hopefully to get to the right outcome.
Keir Starmer speaking earlier. Now, meanwhile, the Kremlin has said the European counter-proposal for peace appears unconstructive and will not work for Moscow. They say the original US plan had many acceptable provisions. Now, you might remember that was the plan before the weekend that was seen as effectively a surrender by Ukraine to Moscow. President Zelensky, he's been speaking about Ukraine's priorities this afternoon in Sweden.
Respect for human life, no changing borders by force, and no spheres of influence, applied term used to cover the desire to dominate other nations and wage wars of aggression.
That's President Zelensky speaking earlier. Now let's get the thoughts of Tim Marshall, former foreign correspondent and the author of the book Prisoners of Geography. Hi to you, Tim.
Hello there, John.
Welcome, as always. Should we just try and untangle this a little bit further? We got Ukraine talking to America. You've got Ukraine having been talking to its friends in Europe. Do you see any reason as of now to be any more optimistic than in the past about a peace agreement that respects Ukraine's sovereignty and security?
None whatsoever. Not on any of the three plans that are out there. And before I go further, John, we've really got to deal with what the Prime Minister just said. He repeats over and again a just peace. And yet the deal that he is now talking up, the EU version of the 28 points, hands over 20% of Ukraine to Russia, which has conquered it by force. It has changed borders. It in no way would be just. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go ahead in order to stop the fighting if security guarantees can be given, but please don't call it just, because I think that's an insult.
Yeah.
Now, I'll come to the substance, John. You have to ask yourself, does Putin have limited objectives or does he have unlimited objectives? If he has limited objectives, then I think there is something in these deals, whichever iteration finally lands to be signed. You might remember a few weeks ago we discussed it and I was talking about the concept of a tablecloth and it's all creased and you have to then get it to the table and start ironing out the creases. Well, we're there now and we're closer now than we have been before. But my goodness, those creases are big. It's basically 2 points of the 28. The first is the land swaps, such as they are, which is essentially Ukraine giving up even more land, even land that the Russians haven't actually taken yet. And crucially, in that land are some of the fortified cities. If they're handed over, then if you believe that Russia has unlimited objectives, then the way is open next time for the conquest of the whole country.
Yes.
The second bit is point 5. The American language says reliable security guarantees. The European point 5 tries to upgrade it to robust security guarantees and then goes further and says the American should put an Article 5 type promise on the table, which is that basically if it happens again, we're all going to war, including the Americans.
And Tim, I mean, I said a moment ago that you could be forgiven for thinking this was all pretty pointless. I hate to be thought cynical, but it's difficult to be, well, as you clearly are not at all optimistic. And we're still, it's still being at least discussed, the idea, the notion, the possibility of Ukraine handing over territory that hasn't even been conquered by Russia. But from what I've been seeing and hearing and reading, even if there was such an attempt on the part of Zelensky, there would be a mutiny in the army. There would be outrage in the Ukrainian public. He couldn't go there.
Well, under the constitution, it has to go to the country if you are to sign away territory, which again means that the language is going to have to be pretty interesting. Well, look, the army is exhausted. The country is exhausted, but I don't think it's so exhausted that it would sign what is essentially a suicide note, because I fall into the camp of that Putin has unlimited. I can quite understand. This is why I'm trying to frame it in this way, John. I quite understand if you genuinely believe that Putin has a limited objective in this and it's just to get this little buffer zone and then he's done, then there is a lot in this document to favour it, as long as there are security guarantees. But if you don't believe that, and I'm afraid I don't, I simply think you're signing a suicide document, and again, I take your point that the Ukrainian people, government, and the military may well not buy that. And I would go further. I think you're even just... I wrote a piece today and I said, the way it is at the moment, if it's unlimited objectives, this is a document which is their suicide note, and it paves the way for the road to not just Kyiv, but to Warsaw. Because, there's a lot more in Russian foreign policy than just Ukraine.
Yes. I mean, can there even be any encouragement in trying, Tim, to analyse thinking in the White House, in Washington?
Yeah.
I mean, we had a plan, leaks at the end of last week, which was very widely seen as leaked by Russia. It was essentially all of Russia's demands, largely undiluted. And then there was an argument about whether it had been leaked by Russia or by America. The American Secretary of State told a room full of senators that this was a wish list from Russia. And then he denied having said any such thing almost immediately afterwards. And just now, just as I was coming into the studio, the Washington Post reports a US government source saying it's absolute chaos, that President Trump is not engaging in any of the detail at all.
Yes, he's not known for detail, is he? There is some semblance of narrative through that chaos. And I think you go back to that White House meeting, that infamous one where, he behaved disgracefully and humiliated Zelensky. I think we are back there. I'm not sure how far we've ever deviated from there, from
Yes.
that humiliation.
Yes.
And the writing was on the wall. And the Europeans, they fool themselves about, having Trump whisperers that bring him round. Yes, he comes around sometimes, but no, the overall thing is that he's happy to sell out Ukraine or to walk away because of the bigger picture, that the game is up with it for us. The Americans have decided that Europe is not as important as it used to be. The Americans aren't afraid of the Russians, and so if the Europeans don't support it, they're not going to, which is why the Europeans are in such a panic. Now, their 28-point plan, there is stuff in it. And I do think that the first draft, the one we got a few days ago, the American or more likely Russian plan, it's not the final document. If there is going to be something signed, it's not going to be that. It'll be a mix of that one, the European one, which we got yesterday, and the new one, a Ukraine-American one that was formulated today in Geneva with Rubio, the Secretary of State, was there. So there's three things on the table, and when you put them together, if you can get a cast iron guarantee about military, that we will go to war if it happens again, and if the fortress cities are not given away, I think the Ukrainians may be able to approach the idea of signing it without cast iron. Without or being forced to give away the fortress cities, it's pointless. You're just buying yourself 5 years.
Yeah, and those are mountainous ifs, aren't they? Tim Marshall, as always, lovely to talk to you. Take care. Now, I want to welcome to the programme Senator Ellen Conway-Moutet, the Vice President of France's Defence Committee. Good afternoon to you, Senator.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the programme as before. Can I just ask you very straightforwardly then, from where we are now, 2 plans on the table, lots of talk, so much still just hovering in the air. Do you feel at all optimistic about a deal? Do you feel pessimistic?
Well, we have to look forward to the end of this war, given the attrition, both, from a human point of view and the destruction of the Ukrainian country. I just want to say that I think us Europeans are still using maybe an old way of diplomacy and thinking that, we can take our time and construct something. And yet, I think we are just advanced by the speed of decision by Donald Trump. And not to forget that he has dismantled his security administration, and that today discussions are being made on a bilateral basis. We know, I think there are more and more proofs coming out that the deal was in fact, yes, the Russian proposal translated into English. Mr. Wichkov went back to the States, and it was produced, it was published. And then the Europeans react to that. But the question I would like to ask is, where was the European plan to start with? Why are we not starting from the 19-point European plan and having the Russians coming to the negotiation table to discuss it? So while, yes, indeed,
but Senator, is not the answer, if I may though, is not the answer to that the Americans, who are absolutely pivotal to this, they do not want to negotiate with Europe. They wanted to negotiate, first of all, with Russia, and at a certain point, Ukraine is allowed into the conversation. To the United States, Europe is very much on the sidelines. They cannot be, in Washington's eyes, a primary player.
Yeah, but we with our behavior, somehow we prove it, that we wait for the Russians and the Americans to talk and then we react. And if you remember the European executives going to Washington in a delegation to talk to President Trump, but it's always in reaction. I would like us to be a little bit more proactive, as I think everybody is convinced in Europe that it is not just the future of Ukraine, it is the future of Europe which is at stake. And I think the previous speaker has just very well argued that point. So if we're convinced of that, I think we should get our act together and realize what actually Ukraine means in the European architecture, what protection we want to give it, what involvement we want to have, and not just be reacting each time as we do, because then, of course, we are just proving that indeed we are not a main player, when in fact it is all about us,
Yeah, I mean, later this week, there are going to be more conversations among the so-called coalition of the willing, which is France, led by France, and the United Kingdom, and many other countries engaged as well. What is the point of those talks? Where are those talks leading?
Well, they're leading to the point where we will find a compromise. I mean, all wars have ended suddenly with people around the table being able to find a compromise and then having discussions, indeed, if it's a territorial issue as to the new borders. But I think we need to bring into it what Donald Trump and play maybe into his game. And that brings us back maybe to Jean Monnet's vision of Europe, to say, well, we will be at peace if we have common industrial and economic interests. And this is what Donald Trump is interested in. And if you remember in the first deals, and that's how he went back over the deal, with Russia the first time, because President Zelensky was able to put on the table, indeed, some very interesting proposals for American industry and American interest in Ukraine. But obviously now the Russians have kind of higher the stakes because, with their oil, gas, and so on, they may be able to kind of say to Donald Trump, well, look, you like deals, this is what it is about. And, Ukraine is just one element that we just need to put on the sideline, and let's move forward to something further, which will explain why Donald Trump doesn't have much interest in the details. He wants to strike a big deal, and he wants to just put in names saying, well, they were at war, and I'm the one who signed on peace. But peace along his own terms as to what he can get for the United States, as it is his own interest, and at the expense of Europe. And as you rightly said, he has very little interest in us. But it is up to us to stand up and maybe be a little bit stronger and put on the table what is at stake also for American interest if the Europeans come together and start negotiating the way we should have done with the tariffs, but we didn't.
I'll have to leave it there. We'll carry on the conversation a bit later on in the show. Senator Ellen Conway-Moutet, thank you so much.